In December 2023, restricted airspace above Langley Air Force Base was breached for 17 consecutive nights. Radar operators and base military personnel watched upwards of 40 unidentified objects swarm the installation in highly coordinated waves. The objects arrived on a schedule, usually 30 to 45 minutes after sunset. Eyewitnesses reported a variety in the fleet, ranging from commercial-sized quadcopters to craft the size of a small car, moving as if on a conveyor belt. The sudden incursions posed such an immediate risk that base commanders were forced to rapidly evacuate their F-22 stealth fighters. These multi-million-dollar assets were relocated to prevent mid-air collisions or the threat of dropped explosives. The relocation of the F-22s demonstrates a direct trade-off. To protect advanced combat aircraft from low-cost interference, the military had to surrender its own airspace. Military commanders could see the drones with their naked eyes, but they couldn't shoot them down. They had no way to track where the craft originated, and firing missiles over a populated Virginia coastline posed a severe safety risk to the public. This exposed a mismatch in radar technology. America's NORAD systems were built during the Cold War to detect high-altitude bombers and incoming missiles. Small, low-flying drones slipped right underneath that scanning field, essentially invisible to the nation's primary defense net. Even when the swarms moved off base, the response was paralyzed by bureaucracy. Once a drone crossed the perimeter, jurisdiction fractured across the FAA, the Coast Guard, the FBI, and local police, leaving no single agency in charge of the response. The incident at Langley reveals a vacuum in domestic security. Decades of prioritizing high-altitude, long-range defense systems have left sensitive interior perimeters vulnerable to asymmetrical tools now readily available to any adversary. While the Langley incident involved drones that could be categorized, military airspace has also been repeatedly breached by phenomena that defy standard identification. For years, naval aviators have documented unidentified aerial phenomena operating inside restricted training zones. During a 2004 training exercise off the coast of Southern California, the USS Nimitz strike group tracked an object that dropped 80,000 feet in a fraction of a second. When an F-18 descended to investigate, the smooth, pill-shaped craft abruptly engaged the jet and began mirroring its exact movements. These objects lacked wings, flight control surfaces, or any thermal signature of a heat plume from an engine, yet they were physically present, registering clearly on ship radars and the pilot's own infrared targeting cameras. Because the craft didn't match the known profiles of Russian or Chinese jets, the sightings were often dismissed. A stigmatized military bureaucracy chose to ignore the data for years, labeling the accounts as too strange to be a serious security concern. By treating these anomalies as a punchline rather than a priority, the military allowed an unknown entity to surveil its operations with impunity. This institutional denial turned a lack of information into a national security crisis. This same vulnerability is being calculated on a global scale. While the United States spent 2 decades focused on land wars in the Middle East, China studied the American way of war and began engineering a specific counter to it. The CIA assessment suggests a clear timeline. President Xi Jinping has ordered his military to be prepared to take back Taiwan by force by the year 2027. To achieve this, the People's Liberation Army developed a rocket force centered on long-range precision weapons like the DF-21 and DF-26 missiles. These are explicitly designed as carrier killers. The goal is to keep American ships 1,500 miles away from the Chinese coast. At that distance, the aircraft carrier's primary weapon, its short-range fighter jets, cannot reach the battlefield without constant aerial refueling. China's massive industrial output has allowed its fleet to reach over 350 vessels, officially overtaking the U.S. to become the largest navy in the world. China is not attempting to match the U.S. Navy one-to-one. They have systematically built a force designed to neutralize the U.S. military's historical reliance on projecting power from massive, close-range platforms. The U.S. cannot simply build its way out of this deficit. Since the end of the Cold War, the American shipbuilding industry has collapsed, shrinking from over 30 major yards down to just 7. This decline was exacerbated by several botched procurement programs. The Zumwalt-class destroyer was intended to revolutionize the fleet, but cost overruns pushed the price to $8 billion each. Only 3 were ever built. The Navy also invested $30 billion into the littoral combat ship. This program produced vessels plagued by structural defects and engine trouble, ultimately leaving the fleet with ships that lacked a clear operational purpose. These failures have led to a shrinking fleet with a massive maintenance backlog. Existing ships are being pushed into longer deployments, putting a dangerous strain on a naval workforce that has already stretched thin. The strategic risk includes more than foreign weaponry. The Navy's own industrial rot limits its capacity to manufacture or repair assets at the scale required for high-intensity war. The military is now scrambling to adapt. The Pentagon has established a formal task force to analyze UAP data, and NORAD is deploying mobile flyaway kits to provide domestic bases with rapid response anti-drone defenses. In the Pacific, the U.S. is leaning on its remaining technological edge. American nuclear fast-attack submarines remain at least a generation ahead of Chinese capabilities, providing a stealthy deterrent that is difficult to counter. By 2045, the Navy aims for 40% of its fleet to consist of unmanned platforms. Systems like the Orca are being built for clandestine missions, such as mine-laying, that allow for high lethality without risking human crews. The military finally recognizes that the future of combat relies on stealth and autonomy. The era of putting massive crews on large floating targets is being phased out in favor of decentralized, undetectable systems. The overarching lesson, from the drone swarms at Langley to the missile threats in the Pacific, is that the traditional paradigm of peace through massive, visible strength is obsolete. There is a growing disparity between the staggering cost of legacy hardware, like aircraft carriers and stealth fighters, and the cheap, accessible nature of the asymmetrical threats that now neutralize them. High-tech defenses can be overwhelmed by sheer volume. When mass-produced attackers are cheap enough to be disposable, they have the power to exhaust the most sophisticated military hardware on Earth. If the U.S. does not prioritize countering these inexpensive, decentralized threats, it risks a failure in its most basic duty. Without urgent adaptation, the military could find itself losing the next major war before a single shot is fired.